Welcome to a quick review of the V90 Cross Country. Now, because I've already done a comprehensive video on the S90, which this is so similar to, a lot of it is just going to be rehashing the same thing. Now, there's a guarantee, one thing here, I'm gonna mix up the S and the V and the X and the Q and all the letters of the alphabet talking about this car, so give me some leeway on that. But let's take a look. Now, whatever you want to call this, a station wagon, an estate wagon, a hatchback, whatever, this is why somebody's going to buy this. Volvo understands that not everybody and their grandmother wants an SUV. They want a wagon, but they also want a wagon with more ground clearance, and that's what this has. So it gives you about 8.3 or 8 inches of ground clearance, which is a lot. That meets it's very similar to most CUVs that are out there. So you get the practicality of an SUV, kind of, and all-wheel drive, and then you get this. And I'm gonna tell you right off the bat, this is how every manufacturer should do an electronic liftgate. That is how you do it. It opens fast, and it closes fast too. It's a miracle of science. Maybe Volvo hasn't been sued yet because it's too fast for people, but I can live with a liftgate that is this quick. And you know, there's no excuse why other manufacturers have to do it so pathetically slow. So that's a huge plus for this thing. Next thing is, you know, there's this little hydraulically lifted area to get to your spare tire, which it does have. It doesn't just have a fix-a-flat, so that's nice that you don't have to break your arms trying to get in there. It has little nooks and crannies. This is like a breakfast in bed tray. When you take it out, you can bring your girlfriend or your boyfriend, whoever it is, scrambled eggs or scrambies, whatever you want to name it. Now, the next part about this is Volvo understands you don't want to go on the inside to lower the damn rear seats, nor do you want to pull on a tether. Now, these don't go down electronically, which is great because you know that would break, but it does have a release that drops the seats down. You long press the button and take a listen to this. It sounds like some type of monster cyborg walking. Those seats sound like they're about 500 pounds slamming down. Once they're down, I shit you not, this could be a hearse. I'm thinking about buying one to save funeral costs from when my family passes away. I could load them up in here. It makes so much sense without having to have an SUV or a CUV. And I cannot fathom, and I just don't understand why this type of layout isn't more popular than it is. But, you know, that's the buying public. What can I say? Now that I've put the Volvo V90 Cross Country on the BendPak lift, and you get under here, it's basically the same thing as the V90. So you might be wondering why I'm going to rehash this. While I am, there's a few things I want to point out. The first thing is, just got done with the Subaru WRX, which has nothing to do with this car, but I made a comment about how Subaru was behind in their game to smooth out airflow on the underneath of the car. They didn't spend a lot of time on aerodynamics, and somebody commented, oh, what do you know? Well, you take a look at this. You don't have to really know anything to see the attempts that Volvo has put in place here to smooth out air from the front lower lip of the bumper towards the middle section, towards the sides, all the way back. And, you know, little things like diverting air around the control arms, having inlets here to move stuff around the transmission case and cool the turbo or the underbay, and also moving air out. I mean, it's very noticeable. The second thing you're going to notice about this car is its double wishbone geometry. And, you know, I talk about this a lot. You got to get to a certain price point now to get double wishbone suspension in cars. Everything is a strut-based front suspension. And, you know, there is a difference in performance when you get to this. Volvo uses all aluminum. Their lower control arm assembly, the fork, the upright, the complete upright, the hub, the upper A-arm, all of it is aluminum. And, you know, there's just a lot of quality here to be had, and you can tell in just the construction of it. Now as we move along the center to the back, let's take a look. In the back of the Volvo V90 Cross Country, there's a few things to talk about, and it's readily apparent, so here it goes. These massive aluminum lower control arms, and they are used to house these air springs, and the air springs are used with a compressor to self-level the vehicle, not only for getting in and out of it, but it's able to lower the load floor in the back to get things in and out of it easier. And it is used in conjunction with adjustable dampers. You can see the adjustable damper modules on here that can kind of transform the car on the fly, or based on your different sport modes that you choose between comfort or sport, it can adjust the damping for that. The lower control arms of the toe links, they are undercoated, surprisingly. You just take a look at it at first glance, it's like, oh, it could be rusty, but they coat all their stamped steel. And this is something you don't see a lot of, and it makes a big difference specifically in the Midwest, because you take a look at some of these cars, especially the cheaper cars, and they rust out in 2 to 3 years where everything is coated. Wheel bearings, hubs, it just looks like a disaster. So obviously, this being a Swedish car, they know a little bit about inclement weather, and I like to see this. I wish more manufacturers did it. To the exhaust, you have a flap that goes through the exhaust valve, partially probably for warming up and reducing some sound output from the exhaust. I can't notice it at all when I'm driving, to be honest. There's other little things like they've done here with the asphalt-ish or coated wheel wells to reduce tire noise, reduce road noise back into the cabin, and that's one of the reasons why this is, all these little things help it to be a quiet driving experience. All right, since we've seen this car before, we're not going to spend much more time, but let's take it for a quick drive. I want to point out some of the little nuances of what this is like to operate in retrospect, getting out of the V90 to the V90 Cross Country and some other luxury cars recently. There's some pros and some cons about this. I am inside the Volvo V90 Cross Country. Let's start off by checking out some acceleration. Again, the Volvo series of cars have an interesting trick when you brake torque them. Usually you have to have the stability and traction control off, which is activated, of course, in the touchscreen here. When you do that and you brake torque it, it will allow you to rev the engine out to the full red line to hit the fuel cutoff. If you don't brake torque it, it will never work, and it has a much slower launch. So if you want to get the most out of this car, you got to do it. In the turns, it's very much like the S90. It's very, very reminiscent of that. The all-wheel drive system kind of pulls you out of all your mistakes. When you start to understeer a little bit, it just pulls you right out. Now, this does feel like a heavy vehicle, and I think most are not going to push this to the limit, but it's certainly not one of those cars that falls apart when you mash down the gas. You can drive it more hardcore. There is some fun to be had. And despite having a supercharger and turbocharger, there's not the level of thrust that you would expect during the acceleration. It's just all designed for smoothness and linearity. They wanted this to feel more like a naturally aspirated car, so you don't have the penalties of kind of feeling this huge lag at the bottom end, and then it doesn't run out of steam at the top part of the power band. But you know, it doesn't sound like the most inspiring experience either. It's a more refined, quiet, it's just not a visceral driving experience, at least from the motor perspective. Now, the transmission behavior on this vehicle, and I've noted this in the XC90 and the S90, it's like it just seems to do what it wants to do whenever. There's sometimes like just there when I accelerated where it like slammed into gear, took it to the red line, but most of the time it short shifts. It's just, again, it's just strange programming logic for what it does. Honestly, I've just driven this in comfort mode. I never use the mode selector to go into dynamic or eco. I think comfort combines the best of just average driving. I'm getting decent fuel economy. I'm right at 27 miles per gallon, and that's not driving very hard. And I think it's giving you a good balance of luxury car, performance, and, well, just kind of economy. Now, there are some things that I don't like about this vehicle specifically, and it shared with the S90. And, you know, I couldn't put my finger on it when I drove the S90 in terms of suspension. It felt good, it felt refined. Everybody that gets in here is gonna really like it. But after I drove this, I got into the G90 Genesis, and that's where I could really put it more in perspective. And I've gotten back into this, and there is a problem with either the way that the front end is dampened on this. It might be slightly either oversprung or over dampened in the front end, because you get a lot of micro judder, which is like this slight aftershocks of when the suspension is rebounding. You feel it through the floorboards, you feel it into your seat, and it's like this little bit of bounce, like aftershock after the suspension rebounds on more like broken pavement or rough pavement. It doesn't isolate you enough for the type of car this is. Now, that's about the only complaint that I have about the suspension, or really ride quality, because the steering's pretty good. It's electronic power steering, so you don't feel anything, but it responds quickly. Overall, the ride comfort and ride isolation's really good, aside from those little quirks that you get. When you get over really broken pavement, it dampens well, but it just doesn't dampen the little imperfections as well as some of the more luxury cars do. Now, there's a couple other really good things about this. Again, I talked about the all-wheel drive system. That's just a must. It works so well here. The interior space is extremely comfortable, and I'm not going to go over a huge detailed analysis on that. I've already done it on the XC90 and the S90, and it's almost identical here. A lot of the good things carry over and some of the bad do, but you can watch those videos for that. One of the better parts about the driving experience, and I really didn't notice it until I started driving at night on rural roads like this road, the light output of these headlights are amazing. The color temperature is not too cool, it's not too blue. When you turn on the brights, I swear you could see these in space, and I say that a lot. They are legitimately amazing. So if you're driving out, it's a very dark situation, or like rural areas like this, man, you're going to be really happy about it. I'm sure the oncoming traffic's not going to be so happy, but you can also tell that the headlights are pretty intelligent. They're very good at auto leveling themselves, and they're really good at turning as you turn the steering wheel. There's no delay, there's no lag, and it's one of my favorite parts about driving this car. It's something you don't think about as a daily driver, but it's one of the things I appreciated more than a lot of vehicles I've been in recently. I think really the last thing to note is kind of the road and just isolation, sound isolation. This is an extremely quiet cabin. You know, I'm on broken pavement right now, and you're gonna hear a little bit of my camera sensor rattle that's there. That is not rattles. There are no rattles. There are no creaks. This is an absolutely unbelievably solid feeling car for the price point. And yes, it's a little bit more pricey at around 60 grand, but you know, I'm thinking to myself, what are you paying for when you're getting into the $60,000 range? And when you look underneath, you're paying for the undercoating, you're paying for the suspension geometry, the double wishbone, the all aluminum pieces. And then when you get in here, like when I put down the seats, everything is so hefty and solid. In a lot of like kind of the more nerfish luxury cars, you get into the more cheaper BMWs and the Audis, and they're not built like this. I can tell you that. You don't get the sense of solidity that you get in this Volvo, and I think that's one of the bigger reasons why somebody's gonna buy this, aside from having kind of the wagon or the hatch in the back. This is a great balance between SUV and car, and that's the biggest thing to note. Final thoughts. Volvo is one of the few manufacturers, at least in America, that is bringing this wagon style over here. We don't have too many companies doing this at all, or at least doing it right. This is how you do it. And not only have they brought the wagon here, they've also kind of started to bridge the gap between CUVs and SUVs. Now, the problem with that is you're not going to poach people away from other brands, mostly because of the styling of this. It's a very kind of sedate, kind kind of uninspiring look to it. It doesn't have a lot of passion when you look at it, but this is all about functionality. It's a clean design, and it works really well. It's going to work really well for somebody that wants an SUV or a CUV with a ton of space. And you don't have to have the tall vehicle. It still has good road presence. It still has good road clearance. You can take it off-road. The suspension can handle a little bit of that. So it's something that you can really enjoy as that kind of all-terrain family vehicle. And the best part about it is its level of solidity. Safety, solidity, it feels solid. It's not just trying to fake it with putting a little bit of like sound insulation here. Everything has heft to it. And that's something that most manufacturers cannot get right. That's one of the hugest draws to this. The negatives are, it's still a 4-cylinder engine. I know they're going away from they're going away from V6s, anything bigger than that, and they've consolidated to 4 cylinders. I don't care if you put a turbocharger, a supercharger, nitrous, you have a clown pop out of the hood, it still sounds like a 4-cylinder. Now it's super refined. That's a positive. Transmission's pretty good overall. And the interior cabin is really one of the best. I can forgive a lot of the quirks. I can forgive some of the touchscreen nonsense, how they've gotten rid of physical controls. This is a great place to be. And finally, if you're looking at this, you owe it to yourself to upgrade to the Bowers & Wilkins system. Yes, it does not have a CD player in this specific model, but it is so good that it just kind of, it's icing on the cake with how good this cabin is. I think if you're in this price range, take a look at this over an SUV or a CUV and just appreciate how well built it is. Even if you don't buy it, I think you're going to walk away really impressed with what they're doing here.